struck me hard to my Christian identity because I'm like, okay, I don't experience that. He's talking about people seeing the world as if they're Socrates. In my Christian circles, are people actually seeing the world as if they're Jesus? Do they have the Spirit of Christ with them in their discussions?
Jesus dies, goes under into hell, and then emerges later. And if you do that, if you go into the underworld and then hold on to something, you're going to be worse off if you hadn't done it at all, essentially.
When you partake of the flesh and blood of Christ, you are partaking of death. You are dying, and you want to prepare yourself so that you can do that properly.
How can you possibly have a death rebirth cycle in that? Because if you're acting out of tradition, if the action comes first, then what's to mediate that and update it to time and allow it to die off its...
The rituals and ordinances of the gospel of Jesus Christ have within it that cycle of death and rebirth that allows you to die to your old traditions and to become anew. And so the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is independent of whatever imitations, whatever given religion wants to make of it, the gospel of Jesus Christ is the structure of reality. Thanks for putting me on the spot. You're challenging my religious beliefs really hard. So, all right, Joshua. Do you go by Joshua or Josh?
Either's good. I mean, I think people generally call me Josh because it's shorter and easier.
All right. Well, hi, Josh. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Yeah, I've been looking forward to this. That is a nice like room. That is really inviting.
You. This was originally a deck off my house. I enclosed it, and this part of the deck became my little personal study. So,
wow, that looks really inviting. Very cool.
Yeah, thanks. I put a lot of work into this little nifty. It's a 8-foot by 12-foot room, so pretty small, but it holds all my books. So,
yeah, you have an artistic touch then, because I mean, there's something really aesthetic about those sort of like brown tones and like the way everything is a bit ornate, but very rugged as well.
Yeah, as well. I am in North Idaho. I do live the rural lifestyle, so I have the rugged feel, but I like my books, so I try to get that little academia feel. And the lady at Home Depot had good taste in paint, and she was really helpful in picking out paint colors. And this material right here, tongue and groove, I hate drywall, and so I'll use tongue and groove all through my house because it's easier to install than for me doing the mud work for drywall. I hate it. So
cool. I mean, that looks great.
Yeah. Where are you at? Where are you located? What state are you in?
Alberta.
Alberta. You're in a different country.
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe Donald Trump would think we're just one of his states, but
Oh, okay. So you know the dark night, the short days like I do. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I'm about an hour south of the Canadian border.
Oh, really? Really? So
Yeah,
you're pretty familiar with the cold weather and all that.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. We get a lot of snow up here. Do a lot of my own plowing and yeah.
Cool. Now,
Yeah, I live off a national forest road in the middle of the mountain woods. So I have a little homestead.
Yeah. Sounds fun.
So it's a very interesting lifestyle.
Why is that?
Oh, just well, right now we have wind warnings, which means we'll probably be out of power at some point tonight because the trees will knock down the power, and I'll have to fire up the generator and get that going. I have to plow my own roads because we're on the forest road. We don't have the county doing it, so it's on our responsibility between myself and my neighbors who own the adjacent land. So, I do a lot of gardening up here. I heat my house with firewood. So,
basically, almost perfectly on cue. The internet got pretty bad. I'm not sure if it's your end or my end, because my end sometimes does get bad, but a large part of that cut out. I couldn't quite hear you.
I am on Starlink, but We have a storm coming in
Oh, you
tonight.
are? Okay.
It's going to hit its peak in about 3 hours. So
Cool. Okay.
yeah.
I'm on Starlink as well. Um,
I wonder. Hopefully the call goes good because I mean it did cut out there pretty severely. So if I ever like that might happen where maybe it could be you or me again, but where it cuts out. Were you wanting to do kind of a really formatted discussion around that? What is it? The Socratic dialogue,
Oh,
DiaLogos.
DiaLogos, yeah, from John Vervaeke. So
Yeah.
yeah, I was thinking I could. I was kind of jumbling it through my head how I would talk about this with you, based on how you'd like to talk about it as well. Whatever we can agree on. But I was thinking I would perhaps talk about how I discovered John Vervaeke and how I've put it into practice and how it could perhaps be of utility to students of the Peterson Academy. So
Yeah, that'd be very, very interesting.
yeah,
And yeah,
but you saw
so
you watched the video I sent you, right? And it was
yeah, that was amazing. Like
yeah,
really, really remarkable. Yeah.
it wasn't overwhelming because I know it was episode 14 of the After Socrates series, so there was a big risk of it getting taken out of context because there was 14 other episodes prior to it.
Oh, I mean, it was watching it was at a perfect level of hitting me on engagement and novelty. Like to a rare extent, like I rarely find things that I'm both that there's something that I can glean from it and it's comprehensible to me in that balance.
Oh, good. Are you familiar with have you taken any of Vervaeke's courses at the academy? Are you familiar with any of his other work outside the academy?
Yeah, for sure. I've taken I went through the Primacy of Beauty a bit, the Intelligence, Rationality, and Wisdom one a bit. I don't think I made it to the end. I did it a bit before. Then when I was um talking to you, I went through them some more. I also have sort of seen Vervaeke, around. I mean, he's in various podcasting circles and stuff. I'm probably not as familiar with his ideas as you are, but I am familiar with them to some degree.
There's enough that there'll be a shared grammar. I know when I first started reading John Vervaeke, or I heard him in the podcasting sphere, couldn't understand like 80% of what he said, and I remember the first podcast he had with I found with him and Jordan Peterson. It took me 2 weeks to get through that podcast because I had to sit down and take notes and really just slow down. Like, what is he saying? But then it all
Now,
started to click over
okay,
time.
now I wonder if I understand him, if I don't understand him, because something that can happen sometimes is the worst thing that can happen is like I think I understand something, but really I'm missing certain key things that just really shift the meaning. Because I actually, before talking to you and then going into Vervaeke on a second dive, actually before seeing that video you sent me, I didn't understand really what Vervaeke was doing and what he was after. I was like, okay, I this is my perspective of Vervaeke. I was like, I see that these things he's saying are true, but I don't
Mm-hmm.
see how they're useful in the Peterson sense because there's a very pragmatic way Peterson presents information where everything he says you can immediately link it to directly how it affects your life, and I couldn't find that connection. But then after that, watching that video you sent and going through Vervaeke some more, I started to see like, okay, I see what he's up to. So I am really curious what you know what your perspective of Vervaeke is and what you find really salient about his information.
Yeah, what for me? So I started understanding John Vervaeke because he does have a huge technical grammar. A lot of, and he's different when I think his best work is on Peterson Academy because he's refined his teaching skills, so he's teaching to an audience that is not immersed in the cognitive science grammar at all. And so he's gotten really good at that. But in his other works, especially when he's in a podcast with Jordan Peterson, him and Jordan Peterson get a little excited and they start going into the weeds. And then the listener has to stop every 10 seconds and look up whatever words he's saying. But what really landed for me, helped me understand the grammar, was in the After Socrates series, because in the After Socrates series, and this is going to sound a little woo, but he presents a lot of mindfulness type practices, meditation practices. He gives a lecture for about an hour and then spends 20 minutes just walking you through a practice. And as you do the practice, and you sort of map through practice, through an embodied cognitive sense, you enact what he's teaching in the courses. And so in an embodied sense, you start to comprehend everything he's saying. And that's when it started to really click to me. When I did the centering meditation, the humble wonder meditation, even some of his stuff on compassion. And then the Platonic stuff started to make sense. I was like, that is what he's trying to get at with Plato. That's what he's getting at when he's talking about Socrates. And that's why it's relevant to cognitive science.
That is what I really got from it when I watched the video, was this feeling of like, there's a process here, an understanding of how to approach various forms of information where you can be a bit more productive than just going into it on a regular, the way you'd normally do conversations. Like the format he was employing there was something specific that I think augmented and amplified the effects of the synergy of people working together on virtues, as it was in that specific video. That is the biggest thing I understood when I watched that. What I'm just really curious when you're talking about the practices, the meditations and stuff like this. Could you like explain a bit more in that? Because I didn't watch the whole Socrates series.
Yeah, it's hard because do you understand John Vervaeke's kind of his 4 P's of knowing: the propositional knowing, the perspectival, or the procedural, the perspectival, and the participatory knowing. A lot of academia, intellectual discourse, what we read in books tends to stay in that semantic realm of propositions. And it just remains almost surface, almost shallow. What the practices do is they help you embody in a more procedural level the content. And if you do it right, and he even gives practices on to gain a perspectival type of knowing through the Liturgical Divina, the type of reading where you're not just reading for facts and you're doing your logical analysis of the book, but you're reading to try and, when you read a book, you're trying to read to embody or capture the perspective of the author. So you're trying to read from the author's viewpoint as opposed to just your objective perspective. You're trying to hop into the author's mind and see things from his perspective. And the example he gives to that in After Socrates, he talks about some of the ancient shamans and their roles for like a given tribe. If you wanted to go hunt down the deer, you're a tribe that wants to kill Bambi. Well, the shaman would do this sort of psychotechnology rituals that would put them in the embodied state of a deer, and by adopting that perspective, it would lead the tribe to the game, and then they would get the deer. And very much like that. And that's what caught on. That's what struck me, because he was talking to Jordan Peterson about DiaLogos in one of his podcasts. And he said, is my camera angle okay? I need to put this down a little bit. Okay.
Oh, I thought it was pretty good.
Okay. He was talking about how in DiaLogos, this powerful thing with him, and I'll explain what DiaLogos is if people are going to listen to us more technically what it is, but I'll describe the effects that Vervaeke was describing. It was as if the spirit of Socrates came into the room and they were able to see the world as if they're Socrates, or speak and tap into the collective intelligence. And now this is sounding super woo, and it is a little woo. But what happens is people come in and they're not just representing their own individual viewpoint in a discussion, but they're coming into a dialogue representing, they do it right, the perspective of their sage. So Jonathan Pageau does this really well in the Exodus series and in the Gospel series on Daily Wire Plus. he says, I'm here and I'm going to represent, I think it was St. Gregory of Nyssa, or no, St. Maximus the Confessor. And so, although he does interject his own perspective, he has immersed himself so well in St. Maximus the Confessor, he can now see the world as if he is St. Maximus the Confessor. John Vervaeke does the same thing with Socrates via Plato. He starts to see the world as if he is Plato, and that changes his worldview. And the way Vervaeke discusses this in the After Socrates series, he distinguishes between imagination and imaginal. Imagination is when you close your eyes and you visualize a sailboat, or you visualize some fantastical scenario, where you're the Superman and you're rescuing the girl. You all did that as a teenage boy. But to engage in an imaginal practice is when you don't fantasize about it from a third person perspective, but you put on the mask of Zorro, or you put on the mask of Batman, and you start to see the world as if you're Batman. So as a kid, now you see your parents as, I don't know, civilians or villains, and your sister's the Joker, and you're jumping from couch to couch as if they're the building tops of Gotham City. And you start to see the world as if you are Batman. And this maps really well onto Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning course, when he goes into the whole phenomenology and seeing the world through a narrative, and it changes your experience of reality. That's what Vervaeke is getting at. And so I heard that on a podcast, and it struck me hard to my Christian identity, because I'm like, okay, I don't experience that. But he's talking about people seeing the world as if they're Socrates. In my Christian circles, are people actually seeing the world as if they're Jesus? Do they have the Spirit of Christ with them in their discussions? Is that sounds like something, because I'm a Christian, but that sounds like something I'm lacking in my Christian faith. And so that's actually what drew me into John Vervaeke and trying to learn more about this DiaLogos thing he was presenting or discussing with Jordan Peterson.
Wow, this is very, very new to me, and this is connecting a lot of dots between Vervaeke's models and the practices that I was seeing there. It doesn't feel that woo-woo to me, because but I'm trying to wrestle with two perspectives I have on this. So like the for and against. What I see in this that's really, really valuable is that, like, people they use different models for approaching things all the time. And I would say that if you're trying to be good in some field, like, let's say this is a very isolated, maybe concrete example, it's easy to approach. If you're trying to be really good at chess, you could from the outset think, okay, well, all kind of perspectives are good, but if you're not embodying, like, the way that actual chess masters, like, really at the very, very deep level view and approach the game, then you're not going that far. And so, like, when it comes to different practices, it seems like getting beyond, like, the I'm going to look at it my way, there is, like, a correct way to approach it axiomatically, like at the base level. And so jumping into that immediately, because you go to any field, you're having somebody learn how to do music, right? And everybody comes from different ways of doing it. But if you can go, okay, at a very, very deep level, we need to embody these different, you know, personalities, historical personalities, then you're invoking that.
Yeah, I like to use the word invoke too, because it's used in religious settings. You invoke this when you have an invocation. You're praying, and if you're praying right, you're not just muttering wishes to God, but you're trying to invoke the Spirit in your meetings so that you can see, you can communicate, you can be with each other under the same unifying Spirit. Or if you teach piano, right?
Right.
And so you need to do something. I mean, if your kids, if the student you have is all distracted and everything, you have to perhaps invoke within him, instill the proper spirit, or to use more technical psychology terms, cognitive schema. Have you taken any of Campbell's classes, Dr. Campbell?
Just a bit.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
in the psychology of self class, he talks about cognitive schemas. How you know, if you have a house and you're a home buyer, you're going to see all the appliances, and that's what's going to be salient and stand out. But that same house, if someone is a robber, they're going to be looking for windows that they can easily break through, and they're going to be looking for the dogs, and that's what's going to be salient. Versus if you are a tax guy or if you're the tax guy, you're looking at the roof lines. If you're the home inspector, you're looking at the foundations. And so everyone comes with a different cognitive schema. And what Campbell talks about in the psychology of self class is that you can prime. He calls it cognitive priming. You can prime the right schema. Um, maybe you've heard this before, but he uses the example: the note soured because the bag broke. Do you know what that means? The note
Um.
soured because the bag broke.
Yeah. No.
Now, if I say Scotland, does that make sense? Does it come to you yet? Is the proper schema uploading?
Oh, now got it. Yeah. Yeah. I remember this
Yeah,
example. Yeah. Yeah. This is a good
yeah,
one.
yeah. Remember?
Yeah.
Yeah. I said Scotland, or I said William Wallace, or I have the Braveheart sword behind me, and now you're like, oh, it's a bagpipe, and so
Yep.
you can do things to prime you can do things to prime the correct cognitive schema. So you have the right orientation, so you're looking at the world properly, and the proper things that should stand out are foregrounded, and the things that should not stand out are backgrounded, and that orients you correctly, and that's the role of invoking the spirit. That's why we
Now,
pray.
to some degree, what
Mm-hmm.
this is it's really when somebody approaches a new discipline or field,
Mm-hmm.
they bring with them all their conceptions and ways of doing this. To some extent, this is almost like an ego death thing. Like you're not going to implement your ideas of how this is supposed to do. You're going to try to take on entirely a new thing. Now, when I hear this though, I this is interesting because I feel like there's some metaphysics that are integral in this understanding because generally the way people view learning and information isn't that there's like spirits that you invoke. What they view is that you have a bunch of personalities historically and you go along and you extract all the information and then um you know you'll have moments in different fields where somebody will come along and they will do that. They'll go through all the different fields, they'll extract all the information, and then they'll take it, and then there'll be a supreme implementation of that. Um, and this idea is that there is like personalities that are forever at play. So the Socratic sort of form, the questioning, the questioning place is like a personality, a place of being, and then there is and then there's like the solving place of being. So that feels maybe not immediately clear that that is the reality because somebody may come along and they may go like, and maybe this is not useful to dig into because who knows what the metaphysics actually of this are, but somebody may go there like, well, I don't want to invoke this other personality because to invoke another personality is um to not do something. It's like to be less. It's like to not take it from its my holistic view of it, but to just represent it. I don't know if this is making sense.
I mean the apprehension to conform yourself to an archetype or a spirit because that would be killing your ego. Is that what you're kind of implying, or am I hearing you
Yeah, well,
correctly?
it is what I'm implying, certainly, but it's also this. It's that okay, well, if somebody is theistic, in some sense, where they have a view that there's one kind of truth along it, um, yeah, maybe this is peripheral, not interesting, but I would see this like if somebody views reality as having sort of one fundamental truth, they'd go, okay, well, why would I play a different character? Because then I'm not invoking the one unitary
Mm.
truth.
Yeah, well, that would be I think that's why I think that is one of the pitfalls for modernity, particularly Protestant sects. Sorry if there's Protestants listening to this, but what the Catholic Church has, and I believe Orthodoxy, is they have in their ontology or their hierarchy of reality mediating spirits, mediating angels going up and down Jacob's ladder. There's a
Right.
tier system, and it's not for authority necessarily, where you just it's about obeying, but it's more like mediating the glory of God because you are too ignorant and dumb to try and emulate the Most High all at once. It will kill you. And so you need Moses is to God is to Moses, and Moses is to Aaron, and Aaron is to the 12 tribes of Israel in the Exodus story. And so you need that system, that subsidiary hierarchy to emulate and to go up. And that's why you have certain institutions of that sort. That's why you have, well, that's why every, I think in the most basic level, every son, every daughter needs a mother and a father, because they're emulating the Most High Spirit to their life, like in their sphere of influence, in their walk of life. That's why you have the tradition of the saints in Orthodoxy. It's because, I hate to say this, but sometimes being exactly like Jesus Christ is so terrifying, and I'm almost at a loss, and throwing a book at me and saying just follow all the precepts in this book may not be the most helpful thing. Maybe you need someone who has a higher degree of that archetype, of that Christ-like or that logos in them, and that would be a saint. And then you learn to emulate that saint and be like them. And they're easier to emulate because they're more relatable to you. They are in your domain of relevance. And so there's that, but a lot of Protestantism, Reformation, anti-hierarchy, egalitarian society likes to flatten that that hierarchy of emulation, that hierarchy of veneration, you could say, not worshiping but venerating. You're trying to take what's good from them and help those angel guides pull you up, and everything's flat. And so I think it's hubristic to think that you don't need those subsidiary guides in your life, that you can just have a personal relationship with Jesus, which you can, but to not have those tiers up the way, I think that is dangerous. That can be very hubristic theology. I think that's dangerous because you don't have those practical guides in your life. And so to go to the metaphysical thing, to think you can just, that's why you may not be able to embody the totality of truth. You may need a little division of truth that you can work on in your life at this point to get you to the next rung on Jacob's ladder. Please slow me down if I'm not sure what tradition you come from or what your religious background, so I'm trying to be as neutral as I can with my religious terminology.
Yeah, I think I'm following
Okay, you
pretty well.
follow.
Yeah, and I think it's also really, really interesting, really important, this understanding, because recently, the last several years, we've noticed that the entertainment form has switched primarily from presentations where people work and they present something, to podcasts where people sit down and they talk. And I find two people sitting and talking, that is far more engaging generally than if somebody like even spends more time when they prepare and cultivate information. And I think the reason for that is because when you are when you're watching somebody talk to somebody else, it's like they are eh, they are exploring and interrogating the other person's perspective. um and it's it's like what you're describing of this sort of Jacob's ladder thing, to where if somebody just presents information the way they view it, they just present it to you directly, and it doesn't go through that dialogical process. That person is presenting information what they think is salient, but it's not what you think is necessarily salient. And so having somebody, it's almost like you. That's what a podcaster, podcast, sort of two-person podcast environment is like. It's like you have a person that's like you interrogating the person. So the reason why I'm saying all this is because I think that for optimal learning, one could see that optimally that hierarchy could form to where, like, even to get to like astrophysics or um the theoretical physics, I mean, like really complicated stuff, there could be this process where instead of having to confront the person sort of directly and then you're not able to interface with it as easily, there could be this kind of place where people have conversations and share those. But it's not it's important to understand that model because um that process can only happen organically. That is to say, as somebody is moving from the lower level to the high level, they can only have those conversations where they become that avatar where a person puts themselves in their place for that period of time. Because as they become skilled, they're no longer the avatar for the person at that that more introductory position in their education.
They're able to progress further.
Well, so what I'm saying is, like, if if everybody is having conversations and sharing them,
Mhm.
as people are moving to the top, they're only able to be interesting for people who have not engaged in a subject for a certain period of time, and then at some point in time
Yeah.
they go beyond that. I guess you are understanding. I just
Yeah, and then okay, yeah. So a few things to pull out of that. The dialogical model, the Socratic model, I think it's an excellent pedagogical tool because it creates, you can call calibrating. It creates a feedback loop between the interlocutors. So it's highly relevant as opposed to a strict university lecture professor at the front of the room who doesn't interact with the students. When you interact, it creates almost a flow between interlocutors in a good discussion. I believe that's why Socrates went with that route. Same with Aristotle in the Lyceum. I think it's called the peripatetic or peripatetic method, where they walked around the Lyceum talking, and that was his main method of teaching. But the other point of that is it being more interesting to people lower on the rung. What I found, what Jordan Peterson, and why I'm really grateful for him, and why I'm also very furious when people say I outgrew Jordan Peterson. I learned so much I don't need him anymore. That's bullcrap. What Jordan Peterson has done, being at the forefront of this podcasting intellectual world, is he's had conversations with people like John Vervaeke, um, like Stephen Blackwood and Greg Hurwitz and Jonathan Peugeot and so many people. And what he has done is he's been like Jordan Peterson has been almost like, I think he's been serving as an intellectual father to me. So what does a father do for a kid in a hunter-gatherer society? When the kid comes of age, the father has a relationship with the child. The father takes the child on a walkabout or a hunting trip where they do the whole thing, and the father introduces the son to the men of the tribe, and the kid, kills his first lion or eats the heart of a deer or whatever you do in your that society, and then he earns the respect, or he's now integrated into the world of men. And there's a bunch of other rituals that are attendant with that, but that is one of the patriarchal roles, is the father initiates the son into a new world. And you kind of see that in the guild system with the apprentice and master, introducing it to the world of opening the world. And what Jordan Peterson, I feel, has done for a lot of people is he's made that realm of, because he's so curious and he's so Socratic, he's opened up new realms of intellectual inquiry that I couldn't have access to before, but through the podcasting, it's made it interesting. And so now I can read a lot of things I couldn't have read before, and it makes sense. Like I could pick up, what did I read? Eric Neumann or Marcia Eliade, and Jordan Peterson has introduced me to Marcia Eliade, and now I can read the sacred and the profane, and I almost have like a sort of um, intellectual fellowship with these great thinkers. But Jordan Peterson has been, you would call that psychopomp, that person between worlds. He's taking me out of my little world, like a father does for the kid, takes him away from mommy into the world of men. Peterson, in a weird way, has done that for me in a lot of my pursuits. He's introduced me to Alexander Solzhenitsyn and introduced me to just a whole array of authors. So, to your point.
Yeah, well, I love what you're saying in regard to that, because I
Mhm.
think this is actually something which is really important to understand for philosophers, because I hear philosophers oftentimes refer to Jordan Peterson as like, oh, he's just has some good ideas and he's some bad ideas. And I think that's really naive, because to extend that archetype of the father taking the child out to hunt and learn on these things, there's also an archetypal phenomena that happens between the child-father relationship, where at some point the child wants to individuate. And so what they start seeing is like just maybe all just the problems with the parent. And they end up in the rebellion stage where they're like, well, I'm going to do this on my own. And there's value to this, where the value is like at some point you have to individuate. And if you don't um, start viewing yourself in some sense as a agent, the you end up with the Oedipal mother situation, where you are never yourself. You're always just uh, an extension of maybe the father's systems. And so this is what I see in philosophers, where it feels like I see the way they're thinking, I see the way they're talking. It's like all through Peterson archetypes and perspectives and models. They're like existing through the Peterson model. And then they're saying like, well, Peterson is nothing. I'm like, this, I think for a philosopher to really understand their place in Western society, they have to recognize Jordan Peterson is actually a monumental figure in the history of education and academia and philosophy.
He's monumental and he's controversial, and this has been something from what I've studied. Tyndale wasn't really popular because he translated the Bible into English, which was considered a dirty, low language. You're going to give that knowledge to, you're going to let other people join the world of, our elect Latin-speaking clergy. How dare you, Tyndale? Let's burn him and throw his ashes everywhere. Same with Martin Luther. A little bit with Dante as well. He actually brought together the Latin and made it accessible in Italian through his Divine Commedia, and he was exiled, probably for other reasons. But there is that I can see that elitist arrogance, or that elitist like, oh, you're nothing down there. But I think the great movers of civilization are those figures who create a system, create a medium that dispenses knowledge and lifts the whole up. The person who invented the Gutenberg revolution. Gutenberg, yeah, he did that to a degree. And I think there's that psychopomp role where, and those are monumental figures. Those are very important people in history, but they often get overlooked because they're not necessarily, they're prophetic in a sense, because they're not in the priestly elite system or the academic elite who hold their rank based on tenor, based on status. Because what they're doing by making knowledge accessible to a broader range of people is they are, by lifting the whole, it almost, correct me if I'm stepping out of line here, Joshua, but they're making, it's threatening to the high intellectuals, the high academics, the high philosophers, when figures do that throughout history.
Yeah, well, to tie it into some of the things we're talking about before, there is a legitimate reason why they are potentially afraid of this, and that is that you have people engaging with information for which they're not invoking the right spirit to engage with that information. So the fear in the scientific community is that you have people that come along and distribute information, and it's more dangerous. This is the fear. I don't necessarily agree with this, but this is the fear. It's more dangerous than if the information had not been distributed. Even though the information is true, they're not able to invoke the right spirit of the scientific process or whatever philosophical domain it's in. And I think this does happen, that you have cases where there is a danger to that, but I mean, this is why I think there seems that the landscape for education is potentially massively transforming, because there's also issues with the scientific community being the arbiters of the methods which are considered valid. So yeah.
Would you say that it's the people who have the hammerlock or the arbiters of the method that are valid? Are you saying that they feel threatened by this dispensation of information to the masses more broadly?
Yeah, well, there's two different types of being
Yeah, and
threatened.
I think there's prudence in that, because I get the caution, because I mean, conspiracy theories can run amok. People learn Dunning-Kruger effect. They learn just a little bit about a topic, and then they think they're experts, and then they can fabricate all sorts of not valid models of the world or of the cosmos based on their limited, I don't know, 3-hour rabbit hole binge on YouTube. And so I think that's why I think Peterson Academy is such a great good, because Peterson Academy isn't just dispensing information for masses to consume and then run awry. I actually think Peterson Academy is working towards providing the skills and ability to think through the flood of information, the flood of ideas, and to critically assess that. And that would be the correct spirit, that correct critiquing spirit, that discerning spirit, discerning schema archetype that you would need in such a in the kitchen of ideas. You need to know how to differentiate between what is good, what is valid, what's not good, what doesn't have enough supporting arguments, what premises are false. And I think that's what Peterson Academy is doing in response to that. So I
Yes.
think that
Now,
should
you
abate a lot of the fears.
yeah, yes,
Mhm.
absolutely, because you have professors from Ivy League universities everywhere, part of Pearson Academy. It's a quite a high level group of people. I wanted to. There was something you said about Peterson being more of a bridge between academia and public than being somebody who himself is a high level academic, and um, I don't think that they're as distinct as that necessarily. I don't think you meant them to be distinct, but the public and the academic, I think, bleed into each other really, really deeply. And the understanding and models that Peterson distributed, I think, affected the public's relationship with academia, but I also suspect it affected academia's relationship in amongst itself, where there was many arguments and debates that have been happening for a long time. Because I remember sort of seeing the academics of the time before Peterson having sort of these theistic debates, Dawkins
Mhm.
versus John Lennox type stuff, where the debates were Christian versus atheism. But really, when Jordan Peterson came into it, it upgraded the conversation to where, like, okay, well, there are certain Christian axioms that we can't dispense with from a very, very deep perspective. And so it moved, I would say, the entire academic landscape. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and I would add one more thing as well to that. It may not just be Jordan Peterson, but it may be the time and place too. If you look at what technologies are being invented, the smartphone, the internet, YouTube, higher quality of internet, that also plays a huge role. Because I mean, like you said, these things were going on in academia, debates and everything, but they seem to become much more salient in the world because of, or yeah, much more. They're more accessible because of the distributed power of the internet, and that could also play into a fact like when you have a network. This is going to John Vervaeke's course on Intro to Intelligence. You have a highly interconnected network. You can now tap into a larger the distributive cognition, distributive intelligence, because we're getting so linked up through the internet. you and I are talking right now, this conversation would not have taken place if it wasn't for the internet. And that could also be influential to the relationship that academia has, being like the center of civilization, versus the layman. That creates more of a feedback loop. More ideas, I think, are now being able to propagate and reciprocate at a faster rate than a decade ago.
Yeah. And it's not just a quantitative increase, so not just a quantitative increase of how much information can be transmitted. I would say it's a qualitative increase to where it's changed the paradigm from being location-based to being non-location based, which is significantly different, to where you could imagine there could be systemic problems that exist within location-based systems that prevail consistently, persistently, indefinitely, versus immediately when there's this large distribution thing. I think it qualitatively changes it, and I think it's what you're saying is absolutely correct. That
I think the qualitative can be qualitative if people. This is the fear that this is the trap of this is the fear that the academics have, the high society academics have, that it won't be a high quality. The quality be degraded, and the way because it's a temptation when you have a high seat in academia is you take on almost the philosopher king role, where you view people are not. But the Platonic view views people as being inherently prone to vices, prone to their lower impulses. That's and you need philosopher kings to guide them. Hicks's course, the first two lectures on the philosophy of education, really talks about this Platonic view of people, and they are like that. Versus the Aristotelian view that views people as inherently curious, inherently rational, that they can think for themselves and it's natural, and that they can critically think. And so there's two different viewpoints. And the danger is that people that have that Platonic viewpoint, and they tend to pull more with academics, because you get knowledge, you get a little prideful in your thinking, and now you think, oh, I need to help the less intelligent people because they can't think for themselves. I'm the expert, I have to make decisions, yada yada. Versus the Aristotelian model, that if I just give people the right information and the right education, they can think for themselves. And so that is the apprehension of a degradation in quality given the internet, is that it will cause more misinformation, more sloppy thinking to propagate quicker. And that's a very valid concern. And the antidote to such things is we've been given this gift of higher transfer of information that puts a responsibility on all the individual nodes of that internet, that's us, of the people receiving information, to rise up, take self-governance, take a critical lens, learn to process information better, with a greater degree of scrutiny, with wisdom and rationality. And that's the only way to abate the fears of a degradation of quality.
Now, when Plato was presenting these models of like sort of the republic and like an ideal society, and presented the philosopher kings, this is where I'm saying it's qualitatively different, because it's not the case that in that world you could have everybody being philosophers, because you needed people to work. You needed people to actually do this. But what happens when you have internet and immediate connection between everybody is you transcend those limitations. So the limitations are like this. So science, the way it works in scientific communities, in humanities, we'll use that as an example because science still maybe stays in academia strongly when it comes to engineering and those kind of practical fields. But in the humanities, in the arts, science exists in those fields because of not just a pure scientific model, but actually a model grounded in the architecture of the economy and society and politics that it's in. So you go to a university, everybody in that place is trying to raise up the hierarchy. So it's promoting expertise, but the hierarchy is not based in necessarily expertise, based in potential and money.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the traditional scientific has a limitation.
Which is entirely not a problem in the internet information spreading model, because with the model of information being spread online just between anybody who wants to, suddenly that disappears, because if you extrapolate these models out to their limits, the internet model
of academia is entirely fueled by reputation, which is
Mm-hmm.
distributed globally, versus the academic location model is reputation distributed within the academia. So whatever the academy needs, for example, funding to do various things, it's not necessarily going to be the case that it. No, I don't think I'm not sure if my point is. I don't know. I'm thinking.
No, I can, maybe I'll help you strengthen your point. Academia is tainted perhaps when it's not without. So before the internet, it's prone to be tainted by, you might say, government subsidies, grants, status, not competency, and not prestige, but status, as in the sense I'm going to perhaps fudge my results so that I can get this degree. So it starts getting tainted by all these certain things. And what the internet is doing is it's kind of washing the playing field a little bit by distributing it out. And so there's a potential where it's going to be, it may not have to be, there's a potential where it doesn't have to be tainted by all these differing spirits. To make this more grounded, let's think about what's driving the Bitcoin people. The Bitcoin people want Bitcoin because a lot of them are fed up with the Federal Reserve, and they're like, our government's been tainted. It's dirty money. It's based on subsidies. It's tainting the economy. And so we like Bitcoin because now we can kind of start from scratch here, and we can have a system that is more fair. And it's not backed by inflationary policies, but it's backed by their computer things and the puzzle solving. Because we used to have gold, backed by gold. Then we went to the Federal Reserve, backed by, I don't know, whatever they do with the interest rates. And that's I'm not saying I support Bitcoin, but that's the motive. That's from my Bitcoin friends I've talked to. That's their huge motive, is they want that freedom. They want that integrity back in what they earn, back in the stuff the medium they use for trade. So similar thing with academia and the internet. It's kind of like that. The internet is affording that ability. It's purifying it in a way, washing it clean.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to express this concept because this shows how it's not a conspiratorial perspective, but actually a function of systems. So if you imagine you have a system of people, and there's a society, there's a community, so various people have various roles in this community. If it's scientific, these roles are based on the substance of the science. So somebody maybe makes their career in a very niche field of psychology where they study behavioral examples, where they test people's motivation or willpower or something like this. If somebody comes into that field where it's largely funded and dominated and socially existing in a certain perspective, and somebody comes in and they have a very contrary perspective, it is very likely that a large percentage of the people in that community will make it very difficult for them, because this is basically the core systems understanding. Any social system is really antagonistic to new contrary things, because it immediately dissolves the social system and maybe people lose their position in the status hierarchy. So So novelty is actually not desirable in a social system like this, which is why I think lots of the times we see historically somebody will come up with a new idea, and it's not until like they're long dead until the idea comes into fruition, because the systems really don't want that to happen. And you don't have that same issue with online information spread, because essentially it's not constrained in the same way, essentially.
Yeah, the ideas don't get accepted in academia, and that's why the huge innovators of society, they don't necessarily take their ideas to academia. They invent a printing press, or they invent the internet. They invent General Ford's automobile manufacturing line. They invent a means of distributing things, as opposed to going to the top, and that typically tends to topple the whole hierarchy, the whole, almost the Tower of Babel, because it does that. That point about novelty is really interesting that you bring that up. Based on what we were talking about earlier about learning new things. To learn something new, well, what's resistant to learning? It's like Horus. Is it Horus or Osiris? Osiris is the daddy that doesn't want to learn because he has the ossified state, and so he needs Horus, and so he gets thrown down into the underworld, and Horus has to save him. That motif. It's the dried out kingdom that has become so ossified it cannot actually manage the change that's happening in civilization.
Mm-hmm.
And so what does the dried out state need to do? It needs the waters of life to rejuvenate it. This is symbolized in a lot of ancient myths as, a drought. That's the state being too rigid. Crops are not coming. Fertility is gone. Life is not regenerating. There's no growth. And so the prophet like Elijah has to come and, get rain to come back. Or some similar motif, some rain god has to be invoked to replenish the land. And in the Egyptian story, that is Horus going down into the underworld. Because when a state gets too rigid, it needs to go through rebirth. That's the waters of baptism. If you look behind me here, I got Jonathan Peugeot's artwork, and I have the mountain of God, and you can call that a hierarchy. But surrounded by the mountain of God is the waters of chaos. And
Mm-hmm.
in the Christian tradition, when you are born again, you have to go down into the waters of chaos, just like Horus goes down into the depths of Sheol, the underworld, to rescue his father, just like Jonah goes down into the depths of Sheol to get in the well, Pinocchio and Geppetto. And so there's that pattern of going down to gain rebirth, because when you go down to the waters of chaos, you go down to the beginning of time, because that's the waters at the beginning, the primordial waters of chaos. And so if you are not willing to get baptized, I don't mean this like literally in the Christian sect, but think about this symbolically. If you're not willing to go down and be reborn when the flood waters are rising, you're not going to be able to adapt to change, because the flood waters always represent change. They represent growth. They represent a new cycle of creation. And so what we were talking about earlier with novelty. So novelty is represented by the flood waters of chaos. That's the whole domain of regeneration. That's the whole domain of becoming anew. And so the first step that you must take, I think academia is always having to take, but practically down to the individual level, is when you have new novelty, you have to be willing to die. You have to be willing to descend below so that you can emerge anew. Is that tracking with you, Josh?
Oh, absolutely it is. It's tracking with me, and it's optimally salient. It was cutting out a little bit, so maybe I was even more frozen in non-reactivity than I normally am. It was frozen, but yeah, that's really important. Now, tying this back into the Vervaeke Socratic DiaLogos system.
Mhm.
Well, I'm thinking about that because the in Christianity, of course, the ultimate symbol is of the death and rebirth, and that allows understanding that symbol allows systems, be it social or mental systems, to constantly be in that state as opposed to having to entirely die. So like instead of a nation getting wiped out, the nation can stay updated and then, you know, in itself transform. And so I wonder if, for example, these systems provide a sort of way for you to, when a system is stagnated or something, it's more dynamic than that, but then to disappear out of the system's paradigm and invoke a different personality in that place. So you have a field or something which has a certain way of thinking, but then you can move out of that and not just sort of like rethink it from its own paradigm, but really embody a different paradigm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like it may be it may invoke the image of the Tower of Babel, because try to escape death is really what
Mm-hmm.
it's like, well, we're going to try to escape death by being smarter than it, which is what I'm talking about, is like, instead of having to die, you can die, have more micro deaths and
Mm-hmm.
be okay with that. But I think the distinction between the Tower of Babel happening and the crucifixion is that the crucifixion didn't happen right at the beginning of time, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a building that happens up to a place where you then get to excel, you get to graduate from certain modes of being, where large deaths happen to where small deaths happen. Yeah.
Yeah, you have the accumulation of micro deaths. And if you don't have the accumulation of micro deaths in your life, and meaning you're not repenting. By the way, the word repentance has it comes from metanoia. So the word repentance from the Latin, repultanere, means to repunish yourself. So it has this punishing aspect. But in the Greek, it means metanoia, which means to see beyond. To meta meaning beyond, like metaspace, metasphere, and anoia, notice, to notice beyond. But in order to And so you can think of John Vervaeke's 9-dot problem. You have to think outside the box. You have to notice beyond. And so when a new novel idea flickers and beckons your attention, and that new novel idea, quite often, Thomas Kuhn on Scientific Revolutions, changes the entire paradigm. In order to comprehend that paradigm, you have to be in a state both individually but also societal, as a civilization, to be able to repivot, reorient, and to see the world from that higher perspective. And that requires a micro death. If you're not willing to do that, and you're like the Pharaoh in Exodus story, who doubles down because his heart is hard. He doesn't have a soft heart. Soft hearts, meaning it's not an emotional thing. To have a broken heart and a contrite spirit means you're willing to be reborn on those micro deaths. When you have a hard heart, you cannot adapt to new information. You're too rigid. And so the floodwaters come and they wipe you out. Or the Tower of Babel, you're so obsessed, you're so narrowly fixated on this one goal that you're not willing to microly die, and it just crumbles your whole project. But back to DiaLogos and this idea of micro death. And so, how do we die? I mentioned, how can we die daily to Christ? Or maybe how can you reorient yourself so you're in that position to accept to adapt to new and novel information properly? So you have the spirit of the Logos, which casts meaning into disorder, which brings order out of disorder. That's what it means to have Christ's spirit with you. And so I mentioned at the beginning the whole imaginal exercises, and that's what a prayer life does. When you pray, you put yourself into a position. You're not giving a checklist to God and telling him what you want. You're orientating yourself so that that proper spirit of the logos, you can invoke that spirit, or that spirit possesses you, so that way you can see the world the way Christ does, and you have that courageous spirit, and you're confronting it. So that way, when a problem does hit you, that's so traumatic, so absurd, you know how to adapt to it because you've done it in prayer. You've just put yourself in that position. That's what prayer is. John Vervaeke uses the example. I'm a wrestler, so a good prayer. So like wrestling, if you're too rigid, you're too ossified in your stance, and someone tries to throw a punch at you or knock you down, you're just going to fall right over because you're rigid. But if you're too loosey-goosey, they're just going to pick you up and throw you. So you have to be in a perfect stance. And this stance isn't what I'm going to be in the whole time while I'm wrestling. But from this stance, I can sidestep, I can shoot, I can duck, I can grab. I'm in that optimal grip. That's what a prayer is like. A prayer practice, a mindfulness practice, is putting you in that optimal grip in life so that you are possessed by the correct spirit that can navigate you through the terrain of disorder of your life. That's prayer. And so that's what you can say each day. I am dying a bit when I pray. If I'm praying properly, I'm going through metanoia. I'm reframing the way I see the world, the way I notice things, the way I size things up. I am repenting. I am having a micro death. Then there's another way you can die, and I'll talk about the second because that's related to dialogue. But the third way you can die, and this is done through rituals. That's why you have baptisms. And John Vervaeke gives a whole course on this on Jonathan Pageau's website called The Cognitive Science of Ritual. And he talks about the practical, what happens cognitively when someone goes through like a firewalking ritual, or someone goes through a baptism, and they have certain anointings and all of that, all those ritualistic things that happen, how that actually changes your framework and changes not just individually, personally, but changes how you relate to the community, how you relate to the world. So that's another way to die and be reborn, is through the ordinances of the gospel of Jesus Christ if you're a Christian, or through your various ritual practices if you're in a different tradition. Now, another way that you can die and be reborn is through dialogue. Whitehead said, and Peterson, quoting Whitehead, said that the reason we think is so that our thoughts can die instead of us. And we often think that thinking is a solitary endeavor that you just do within your own mind. In the After Socrates course that John Vervaeke gives, and a little bit in Intro to Intelligence, John Vervaeke gives a different model of cognition, that we're not just solitary beings thinking in our own head. We don't have a monological brain that's just a one voice in our head, but rather our brains are dialogical. And he talks about the hemispheres and how they talk together and the different components of the brain. They're in an opponent process relationship. They are dialoguing with each other. So even individually, people may think that they have this little chitter-chatter voice in their head talking to them. What Vervaeke challenges is, no, you actually have multiple voices in you talking at the same time. And part of a good mindfulness exercise is to learn how to get those different components of your psyche in conversation so that they are synchronous, as opposed to in subterfuge with one another. What dialogue does, though, is it serves two functions. Dialogue, it helps you, it distributes the thinking. So when you are dialoguing with someone in real time and you're actually listening to them, you are engaging in that process of having your own thoughts die, but also accepting new thoughts. And you're in that feedback loop with someone else. If you practice that with other people, that's why it's good to have family dinner every night for your kids. When you practice that as a family, you develop that ability more in yourself. One of Socrates' disciples said the greatest thing that Socrates taught him was to talk to myself. And he learned that, he picked that up by talking to Socrates, by conversing with him. So there's that function of dialoguing with other people, where you're not just monologuing back and forth, and there's no exchange of ideas, you're just speaking over each other, but actually exchanging deep thoughts. That's dialogue. So you do that with other people, you start to mirror it in yourself. And then the second function is, well, when you do it with other people, you are in real time letting certain notions, certain attitudes, certain precepts die within you as you re-update new ideas. So that's how dialogue is a form of death and rebirth. What do you think of that, Josh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so many different thoughts. I just noticed one thing. So this is something that is completely unrelated, but maybe I can link it back in. But
yeah,
when in this video you sent me, and also I noticed you were like mirroring my body language back to me, and I was trying to do that a bit with you, and there was
that's why I moved the camera. I did that intentionally.
But I mean, I thought when I was going to do this that it was going to, I don't know, I guess I didn't have a preconception, but I noticed that when I started mirroring you, and then when I stopped and I would look at you, I would then be able to see what you were saying and what your hands were gesturing, and I would actually be able to draw much more meaning from it. I suddenly I'm aware that potentially I'm not actually reading people's body language when they're using hand gestures. Now maybe I have a tool to do that. This death process. So this seems to be, so this model, the system they were employing, where they really try to become the other person's perspective. This is a form of death through dialogue, because you have to not exist yourself. There can't be an ego of yourself if you're properly taking on somebody else's perspective. And I feel that is a significant part of what that process is. It's properly trying to download somebody's perspective. Now, there is a lot of power in that, because at the outset somebody might think, well, it's dangerous to intake somebody's perspective for yourself, because then will you lose yourself. Jim Carrey sort of had this breakdown where he's like, well, I played a role and then I lost myself.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that, well, that is a part of the significant death that happens, is that, well, you might lose something of yourself, but if that thing is lost, it's probably being lost to something more important.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a double-edged sword, because people can, and I think that's why. I'll address your first point first about the gesturing thing. This is a really good book called Thinking with Your Hands by Susan Goldenmeadow, and what she discusses how you actually will gesture things before you actually can articulate them, and you can use this in the classroom. You can tell that a student's ready to learn a new concept by the way they gesture. And you can use this in a lot of applications, that people will gesture. They will gesture more when they don't have the words yet to articulate it, but they're on the precipice of articulating those thoughts. Is that they will embody the cognitive process. And so incorporating gesture in your communication is well, if we're going to be discussing deep philosophy, might be a good thing to consider, because if you're talking about abstract concepts, you would want a more pure medium of communication. And so she makes the argument that gesture is key to that. And to this idea of you talked about Jim Carrey, and I thought about Heath Ledger as well. I think you having a dialogical practice needs to be balanced with, my opinion, prayer or an ecology of practices, something that grounds you. I'm never worried about that if I'm going to read heck, I'll go read the Adolf Hitler's book, Mein Kampf, and I'm not scared that I'm going to become Hitler, you know. But that's because I am grounded. I don't automatically. I have a relationship with Jesus Christ, the Logos, and I strive to keep that spirit, and that spirit is a discerning spirit. It's grounded in truth, and because I'm grounded in truth, I can critically assess, even momentarily adopt the perspective of other views. And I don't need to be worried about it overwhelming me. But because I'm grounded, it's because, John Vervaeke talks about participatory knowledge. And that's coupled with your sense of self. And that's going to be tethered to your roles. So I am a husband, a soon to be father. I'm also a son. I'm a landowner. I work my land. And those relationships keep me grounded. I was reading Vivek Ramaswamy. He was talking about this, the guy who was running for president for a minute. And he got some really good advice about going on campaign to always take his wife and kids with him, because that will keep you grounded. And it's not an it's maintaining your participatory knowledge of how you relate to the cosmos with you at all times when you go and explore these ideas. That's why I think there's a danger if an enterprise gets too academic, too intellectual, and they neglect the wisdom traditions, the sapiential traditions, that what Vervaeke calls them, that keeps them grounded, then they are more prone to get swept away in delusional ideas or unproductive theories that don't actually are grounded in reality. That's a temptation. So
Yeah.
it's balance.
Yeah. I might present a different model here, push back on
Yeah,
this
let's hear it.
a bit. I also now, were we planning on doing the dialogical practice?
Maybe we can do that next time.
All right.
I think if you're open to it, I have a couple friends on Peterson Academy that maybe would be down to do a DiaLogos, because you saw it was 4 people, right?
Yep.
And I figured out a way to do it with 4 people, even over video chat. Hence my camera's way back like this, because we do practice it. And there's a few stellar students in the academy that I think would enjoy doing a DiaLogos. So maybe next time.
Okay, cool. I definitely
Yeah.
love to be a part of that.
Mhm.
Yeah. So this is where I am pushing into what I would say classical Christians, even Peterson Christians, would find a bit heretical, but I don't find it heretical. But so I don't think the issue when people die is that they're not holding on to, they're not balanced with the right thing. I think the problem when people die and then end up in, metaphorically die, end up in a really difficult place like Heath Ledger, is that they did not die enough. So there's a well-known archetype right in the Gospels where Jesus dies, goes under into hell, and then emerges later. And if you do that, if you go into the underworld and then hold on to something, you're going to be worse off if you hadn't done it at all, essentially. And I think that's what's happening. Now that's considered maybe heretical because a Christian will say, well, but you should at least hold on to Jesus. But I would reply, well, he's real. You don't have to hold on to him. You can fully die and he will be there for you.
Yeah. No, I would push back even more against that you do hold on to Jesus, but Jesus isn't. I think people misconceive Jesus as being this the way of Christ is just this blissful Rousseauian utopia walk in the park. But in the Maps of Meaning course, Jordan Peterson ties Christ to the fruit of, well, both the fruit of life and the fruit of death, because he is that motif of going down and coming up again. It's and to follow that is to partake of the poison that kills you. And that's one of the arguments Peterson makes in Maps of Meaning, that what saves you is also what kills you. It's that forgot the snake symbol, what it's called, but that's what it is. Yes, that. And so I'll pull back a little bit on that, because I'm walking on heretical grounds here. Hell in the Egyptian religion is the Red Sea. It's called the Sea of Reeds, and that's the mythology there. But the idea is that Horus, the sun comes. Egypt is dry land surrounded by water, so the sun comes up out of the underworld, is above the sky, and then goes down into the underworld and does its cycle of death and rebirth and fighting the demons down there below the earth. Then it comes up again, but that is surrounded by the waters of chaos, which is also the waters of hell. So that's the place of hell. That's the sea of reeds. And I love that imagery of reeds, these tentacle things that grip you while you're in the underworld, that wrap you about in the chains of hell. It's what Jonah describes hell is like when he's down there, when the Leviathan takes him down to the depths. He's surrounded by the seaweeds. And if you want a really good reading of that, read J.R.R. Tolkien's translation of Jonah. It's like the one book he translated.
Cool.
Yeah, and so that's the sea of reeds. It's these things that suck you and pull you down into the depths of hell, and then they hold you and they keep you in hell. Now, what's really interesting is when the Israelites leave Egypt, they have to cross through the sea of reeds. But how do they cross through the sea of reeds? They cross on dry land. They have a Passover. It's literally what's called Pascha, Passover. They are passing through hell under the covering of or the dry land of Moses. So Paschal, passing over. Really interesting word that's used in Christian circles is atonement, but that's a made-up word that Tyndale made. The Hebrew from that word means like covering, that you have a covering placed over you, and I think it's called kapat. What I read from that is with Christ, with the atonement of Jesus Christ, which Moses was a type of when he took the children across the sea of reeds, took them across hell, is Christ is that deity, that way that allows you to pass through hell on dry ground. Christ has power over that. That's why he can walk when the Peter, James, and John are out there in the chaotic sea and Christ is walking on the water. He has power over chaos. He is that Passover. And so Christ is that process. But I don't think that still makes it that makes it necessarily blissful or easy. I still think there is an element of horror in confronting death, in picking up your cross, as well as joy and triumph. Awesome. Awe is the word to invoke awe when you're standing in the presence of a being far greater than you. It's the root word for awesome and awful at the same time. Christ is that thing. So that thing that carries you over. So to this motif of death and rebirth, okay. When you partake of the Eucharist, there is an ancient tradition in early Christians where they would confess their sins before partaking of the Eucharist. You don't partake of the Eucharist, the sacrament, the bread and wine, the flesh and blood of Christ, that symbolic meal. You don't partake of that until after you've been baptized. So that's the initiatory ritual. You get baptized at the waters of chaos, you enter through, and you start making your way up the mountain of God. That's Pajot's image here. But you don't partake of that sacrament, that ritual meal, until you have confessed of your sins. And then early church, they had the whole confession of the sins in front of the people. The Catholics hold on to that tradition by confessing. You've seen I'm not sure if you know anything about Catholicism, but they're supposed to confess before partaking of Mass. Orthodox, I believe they sit with the priest and they confess before the priest. But there's something true in there that you want to confess so that you can partake of Christ properly, because to partake of Christ is you're about to when you partake of the flesh and blood of Christ, you are partaking of death. You are dying, and you want to prepare yourself so that you can do that properly. That's why there's confession. That's why there's baptism. There's a whole Christian walk of life. The Eucharist has a pinnacle above baptism. It's more sacred, and that's what you are entering into. And that's what Peterson was making in Maps of Meaning when he talks about the fruit of the tree of life. I think it was a tree of life, but he had the image of such a beautiful image in Maps of Meaning, where it's both life and death at the same time that you're partaking of, and you're able to do that through Christ. And so there is a proper way to die, and that is through Christ. Doesn't mean it's easy at all, but there's a lot of weight to that. So, was that a good pushback to your pushback on? What do you make of that? What about dying through Christ?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's very,
Yeah.
For one thing, I will say there's something very, very sacred about this. I was surprised when I started studying philosophy that I noticed that philosophy happened, 400 BC with like 400, 500 BC, and it happened with Plato, Aristotle, and all this stuff. And then when it got to Christ, philosophy kind of stopped happening, because I was reading Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy, and that's what was happening. And then what happened in the Dark Ages, as they probably describe them, because that's when philosophy wasn't technically happening, was the church was doing things. It was all about the power structures in the church, and the different theology was happening. And so I think that traditionalism is what was happening. It was this mantle being passed on to generations, this very deep truth that happened at the crucifixion.
What I'm saying is like this. We can talk about it like pragmatically. Okay, so
Yeah.
when you say you should hold on to Jesus, I think about extreme states of ego death where you start losing like axioms, you start losing ways of thinking. This is what happens in ego death states. And it seems like there's
two ways you can go about this, where I'm not sure what you're saying with this. So like, if you're in that place where you're like accepting reality, do you, from your model, go, okay, well, we need to never let go of God, never let go of Jesus, or do you allow that? And because what I'm saying is you allow that, not so that it happens, because I think that what ultimately happens is you allow it, you maybe fall into different views, but then eventually you come back because it's real. It's not.
Yeah, it's been tested.
It's been tested. Is interesting, because that's the history of it. Yeah.
And your ideas go through a death and rebirth, and I think we should probably maybe define what it means to hold on to Jesus, or to hold on to the Logos. It's weird because I've never, in my faith, I've been mad at God, I've been angry, I've been pissed, and I've had reasons to, but I've never doubted God. I've doubted myself, and I think that's a Job orientation. Knock on wood, I don't want to be like Job, but Job may lose faith in himself, perhaps, but I don't think he loses faith in God. And I think to hold to Christ, it's not a shallow, I just axiomatically believe there's a God or not a God. I don't think the divide is that simple. I think it's much more deeper than that. It's not even the argument. I don't think that's the real argument that's gonna be relevant in your life, whether there's a God or not a God. I think it's gonna be what's the characteristics, attributes, and perfections of that God? What is he like? And you figure that out when you are confronted with tragedy and chaos and malevolence. You get to figure out, it's in that place of testing where you realize, okay, is God good or not? Is there an order to the cosmos? Why is God letting my child die? Why is God letting this horrific thing happen? And you emerge from that, because you cannot, I do not think you can go through the trials that are going to come into your life with a naive and blissful, ignorantly blissful, where you choose not to think about it, where you choose to just, oh, I don't want to think about life. You're not going to come out of that intact. But I think if you can tether yourself to the proper cognitive schema, the proper orientation, which that is Christ, that is God. You may have your false understanding about what that God is, and other people may have false understanding, but if you can grasp onto that truth, you will descend, and I think you will reemerge whole, or you'll reborn and renew, and you won't lose your soul, so to say, through the trials.
Mm-hmm.
That is my interpretation of what it means to hold on to Jesus, hold on to Christ, have him be the spirit that guides you. Can I share an image of, like, a metaphorical image to describe what I'm saying here?
Yeah.
Have you read the Divine Commedia?
No.
Okay, the Divine Commedia by Dante. I'm on my third one right now. It's a 3-volume work, but Dante travels through the underworld, Inferno, goes to purgatory, and then the last book is he's in paradise. And in purgatory, everyone is there because one thing is they want to be there. They have chosen to make sin the defining feature of their life, you know. And you can think about people who get swept up into the ideology of transsexualism. They've chosen, and, like, man, if you have tendencies, or you have a different sexual orientation, cool. But when that becomes the sole governing principle of your life, where your whole identity is staked around you dressing as the opposite gender and looking like a drag queen, and you literally cannot relate to life in any other way, that's your sole identity. Yeah, you've made that sin your identity, and you've chosen that. Like, that's the spirit that you have chosen to let govern your life entirely. I respect someone who has a different sexual orientation, maybe a little queer. I had a really good friend, and he was gay in college, and man, we would talk philosophy all the time, and he liked Jordan Peterson. He's like, yeah, Jordan Peterson is this masculine force in my life I'm missing. I really like him. And he was great because his sexuality was not the defining feature of his life. He was a lot more nuanced of a person. I think you lose your soul when you choose to take one vice and you make that your sole identity. That's what addiction is, when alcohol becomes your sole identity. And so everyone in hell is like that image, that they have chosen to make sin the soul, their sole identity, and they lost their sense of self. Oh, ego depletion. Here's a good image to throw at you. It's like when you go into hell with Christ, you come out with your identity intact. But when you don't hold on to Christ, you lose your identity in the well of souls, the depths of Sheol. I think of Davy Jones. Have you seen Pirates of the Caribbean?
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, so you know Davy Jones. You have to sign your soul to Davy Jones, and then you can sign your soul to him more and more. What happens to the identity of the people who are in the underworld with Davy Jones over time? Remember what happened to Will Turner's dad?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, you become entirely immersed by it. Your being becomes the underworld.
Yeah, they become these monsters, and then over time they actually become part of the ship.
Right. Yeah,
Remember that?
that's a
Yeah.
strong image. Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, they lose their soul. They lose that logos, the little logi that gives them intelligence and identity, and they've just been subsumed by sin. So that's Dante's Inferno. everyone is subsumed by their sin. And you can tell when Dante talks to them, they're still obsessed with their same sins, man. So when Dante gets out of purgatory, or no, out of Inferno, he goes to this place called Purgatory. And Purgatory is depicted as a mountain. So at Purgatory, he has to cross this river to start his journey up Purgatory. And Purgatory is an upward climb. And he has to go through a baptism through the river to begin his journey. And so everyone on the mountain of Purgatory has been baptized. That's what it's representing. And you can interpret what baptism for Dante meant into the Catholic Church, but you can interpret it what that means for you, what it means to be baptized. And everyone on the mountain of Purgatory, up the tiers of the mountain, are being punished, but not in a sense where it's punitive. They're being punished in a purging sense, meaning they're purging themselves of their vices. They're preparing themselves to meet God. And so it's an upward journey of letting all the punishment is meant to not inflict a cost because you were a bad boy, but it's meant to rid yourself of the natural man, or you could say the sins that have bequeathed you in life. And so they're getting rid of that, and they're going through these exercises to become more saintly so that they can be prepared to meet God. And then while they're traversing up at the very top of Purgatory, there is this image of there's a fiery corridor at the top of Purgatory, and there's another river. This river is coming out of Eden. It's the fountain of life. This river flows out, and it flows down the mountain of Purgatory all the way down to the depths of Sheol, and it empties out in the frozen lake that Satan is frozen in. So it's the same river. It's a fountain of living water at the top, becomes a fountain of filthy water, or a river of filthy water at the bottom. And why is it filthy by the time it gets to the bottom? Well, because people are passing through this river. It's called the river of Lethe, meaning forgetfulness. It's the same river in Plato's Republic too. And when you pass through that river, it washes. In Plato's Republic, when you pass through the river of Lethe, it's the river of forgetfulness. So people drink of it, and then they forget, and then they get to come back down for another round of creation and be reincarnated in something else with their memories wiped clean. The idea that Dante is playing with this river is people pass through the river of Lethe, and it washes away any final sin. Soot. It washes the soot down, and that's why it gets progressively dirty as it goes down the mountain to hell. And all of that sin gets washed down into hell, and that's why the waters are dirty down there. So, and then after Dante passes through the river of Lethe, he then approaches the corridor of fire, and that corridor of fire you can think as a fractal image of the entire mountain of Purgatory. He's going through that final purging of sin. There he meets Beatrice, and then he gets to continue his journey into the many rungs of heaven, you could say. So, it's a beautiful image if you ever take the time to read the Commedia. And it's so good, but here's how I see it. Here is my interpretation of the river of Lethe, the mountain of Purgatory, and baptism. The mountain of Purgatory isn't the afterlife. The mountain of Purgatory is available to anyone who has been baptized and accepted Christ in this life, meaning they are on that upward journey. So you can think many people in their life are engrossed in sin, completely subsumed by their addictive vices. But when they make that choice to repent and come unto Christ, and perhaps make that ritual immersion in water, when they choose to commit themselves to the truth, then they are no longer in Inferno. They are in Purgatory. So I've been baptized in my tradition. I am in Purgatory right now. This life for me is Purgatory. I am working to go through many iterations of micro-death so that I can prepare to meet God, whoever that is, so I can learn to be like God, so I can learn what he's like. And that was symbolically done through baptism, through the waters, going up the mountain. Now, there's something really interesting that comes after you are baptized. And in my religion, it's called the record of heaven. There's the Spirit of Christ, the Holy Ghost, the Logos, the Spirit thing. But it's often referred to as the record of heaven. What is the record of heaven? Well, It's because everything that happens when you are possessed by the Spirit of Christ gets recorded into eternity. It makes it into the story. It makes it into the gospel of Jesus Christ, the good spell, the good story of Christ. You are now bound to the story of Christ after you've been baptized. And so there's a record of that. That way, when you cross through the final pass over of water at the top of purgatory, the river of Lethe, river of forgetfulness, something eternal can pass through that water and not lose its memory. Christ is also referred to when he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Truth means aletheia, meaning the disclosure and restorer of memory. Christ has that memory role. He discloses and restores to you memory. You remember who you are. You remember your place in him. So, when you are baptized, you are given that spirit of remembrance, that aletheia, which is the antithesis to the river of Lethe. So you're able to pass through, and you don't get washed down to hell to be reincarnated as a pig or a woman or a man or a whatever. You actually get to pass through and you get to progress. That is my interpretation of the theology being presented by Dante, and I see a lot of parallels there in the more broader Christian theology. And it makes, so pragmatically speaking, that's the journey I am on when I accept, that's the journey anyone is on when they accept Christ, when they accept that gospel, when they accept that spirit to guide them, that cognitive schema to guide them through life, that they are binding themselves to Jesus Christ so that they can pass over the river of Lethe, so that they can pass through the purgative fires that are meant to destroy anything not of God within you, but purify and keep what is good. So,
Let me try
theology
to.
lesson. Yeah, let's just
Yeah,
scrap
hold on.
that.
Hold on. Let me try to express this in a psychological way, purely psychological, to see if I'm understanding it, because I'm not sure if I'm understanding it. But okay, so you started out talking about people losing their soul and becoming part of this ship. So psychologically speaking, so somebody's in society at some point in history, and they are either they can be in society and participating in it where they are only a reflection of the innovation of society. So for example, maybe they're copying other people, they're doing this, they're not embodied truly in themselves, not a thing, but they're copying stuff. This is what you would describe as not having a soul. And so, and in a sense, this is the incredible danger of losing your soul. I'm talking about using your soul and trying to put it into a psychological framing of it. The danger of losing your soul is that you're copying things, and at no point do you become a part of the actual process of the things, because you're only just a reflection of them. And so then
you're a puppet.
You're a puppet, exactly like the Pinocchio story. So then your memory, you don't start participating in the gospel story because you're not actually doing anything, and therefore you're reincarnating. You're the same thing 100 years ago that can copy stuff is the same thing now. It's not an improving thing itself. So the gaining the ability to have your memories is a result of actually becoming a real boy in the story of Pinocchio, the metaphor. Is that, am I understanding that?
Yeah, it's becoming an agent it's becoming an agent. You have agency. And so when you're addicted to something, Vervaeke calls this reciprocal narrowing. When you are addicted, you are just merely responding to the stimulus of your addiction, and that becomes, well, your identity is tethered with that, and you lose your ability to make rational, agentic decisions. But when you make choices and you choose Christ or the Logos or that thing that brings you up that thing that helps you, that thing that aims and pulls you up, you are now developing a higher degree of agency, which means you are developing a higher degree of accountability, a higher degree of responsibility. You are more rational. And so agency and this idea of memory and being able to make choices is bound up in this. That's why agency has to be respected in any religious pursuit. If you try and compel religion on someone, all that person is going to do, that person is not committing to the process of Christ, which is there to help you expand your agency in him. They're just going to become a puppet of whatever compulsory system you have imposed upon them in the name of religion. And that becomes really quickly a very false facade and tyrannical religious institution. So
Yeah, that's pretty solid.
yeah. So
Now,
psychologically, you are developing agency psychologically. You are expanding consciousness, to use the Wu language.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting to me. I wonder what you think about this. Because I have an interest in these Christian models and then sort of unpacking them to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I present it in the psychological form. But like I think other people don't have this imperative, so they're Christians, and they go, well, like I have no need to unpack this into its psychological parts, but I view it like, okay, well, when you can sort of distribute this information in it's like this. So Christianity is like this, like the star that the guys followed to Bethlehem. It's this
Mm-hmm.
shining dot in the sky with salience, or not salience, but sparkling import to the individual, and you follow it. But I feel like what happens as you follow it is you integrate it, you get closer to the thing, but there are elements that at one point are maybe dogma in Christian, but then become understood, in a way that you go, well, that's scientific now. What do you think about that?
So are you talking about committing along the path to the Most High? You have to commit yourself to certain dogma in order to master it, so that you can now comprehend it
Well,
in its more totality. Or
I guess what I'm asking is like, what element of Christianity do you view as like sacred? Like this is something you sort of don't touch, and then what element do you almost deconstruct? Because
okay, so you're asking epistemologically. Okay, so mysteries of God. Mysteries is a very interesting word. It's tied, St. Gregory of Nyssa, I think, tied it to ordinances or ritual enactments. We like to think of, and there's something to it, because what is a mystery? We think of mysteries as like the genre of detective novels where we have to solve a puzzle. And so we think that God's mysteries are likewise, because we have a book of the scriptures, that the way to get to God is to deconstruct a text. And if you get the right formula and you get all your understanding of Jesus Christ and Godhead and theology, you can check it all off analytically. Now you have the formula to get to God. Versus a more, you might even say, an Eastern understanding, or a more ancient understanding of mystery means know by participation. So your future, you're not married, are you?
no.
No, well, your future spouse ought to be a mystery to you, not one that you saw, but one that you participate with in life. And you know your wife. That's a euphemism for sex in the Bible, but it's not that cheap. To know someone doesn't mean to have sex with them. That's part of it. You might say that's a sacred act of knowing them, but knowing of your spouse is the knowledge that comes by sharing in life with them. You get to know all the nuances of what they're like. You know their personality quirks. You know their characteristics and attributes. You know how they respond, how they react, how they think. You almost embody their thought processes in your own, the way you embody a cognitive schema from a mentor of yours, or even your guru, or hopefully Jesus Christ himself. You're a Christian. It's that type of knowledge. That's mystery. And so your question, what things are okay to deconstruct and what things are too sacred? I'm all for deconstructing practically anything in the written word of God. Like, it's already been, the very fact it was written down means it's been deconstructed for human understanding. It's been made, it's no longer ineffable. You know, things are ineffable, unlawful to utter when people have heavenly experiences. Well, they can't utter it because they literally cannot, because it is beyond conceptual and semantic grasp. So I think anything is fair game to deconstruct in scripture. But like I said earlier about the dichotomy between adopting a perspective and people getting lost in a persona that they are trying to reenact, like in an acting position, balancing that with things that keep you grounded, things that ground your participatory sense of life, your roles in society and in your family and in your local community as a father, as a husband, etc. Those what I would say are sacred, and those are the things you don't want to deconstruct. So you don't want to deconstruct the relational aspects of Christianity because everything's built upon that, the relational and ritual aspects. So marriage, very dangerous when you start deconstructing marriage and you start, I mean, we can talk philosophically about marriage and the beauty of such things, but when you deconstruct it in a way that destroys the actual relationship of man and wife as the family as the foundation of society, you're running into dangerous waters. You're losing the arc that allows your civilization to pass through the waters of the sea of reeds on dry land. Those are things you don't want to deconstruct. Is that a good response about what is okay? Does that answer you? You seem to be asking that question in regards to your own faith. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were asking that question. I'm someone who's intellectual about the gospel, about Jesus Christ, and I love talking in it. People say, "Oh, you're ruining it because you're talking so much about that." Do you ever get pushback from Christians because you can abstract and you can deconstruct and you can pull out the psychological significance of biblical stories?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
I find that, well, yeah, it's like I'll go, okay, well, this is true beyond Christianity. Like maybe Christianity was the only carrier of the truth for a while, but then I'll present an idea where I'm like, well, this is something which is true, and I feel like the Christian perspective is like, well, why are you doing that? Like, why are you sort of saying this is a solid truth in and of itself that isn't necessitating a Christian metaphysics? That makes sense.
Yeah, because I think you and I don't know, for me, I don't, and this is where I come in hot waters with a lot of perhaps more fundamentalist Christians, is I don't view Christianity as the end all be all. I view it as the way to the highest truth. Who I believe
Right.
personally is Jesus Christ. Like, I actually think he is the incarnation of the Logos. But I don't think that your little set of dogma from your given church is the ends. I believe it's a means to an end. And
Right.
and so I get a what are you more Protestant in your background? Are you traditional? Are you high church, low church, or what is
Oh,
your
like when you use church terms, that's where
yeah?
I, for some reason, don't understand very much. I forget what Protestant is, what high church, what does that, what those things mean?
Do you belong to a church? Is what I'm asking. Like, were you raised in a
Yeah,
church?
yeah. My family's Christian for sure.
Is it are but like I'm guessing non-denomination or in one of the Protestants is anyone who's practically left the Catholic Church or is not Orthodox.
Okay, yeah, not
Yeah.
Catholic. Orthodox isn't a word that we used a bunch. My family would be, do you know like Bethel?
Okay, I know Bethel Church. Oh, yes. Yes. I have my friend Chris Graham. He really likes Bethel Church. You would like to talk to him. He's a creative type. You need to talk with him on one of your future discussions for
Cool.
Peterson Academy.
That'd be great.
Okay. So, okay. All right. So this is where there's an interesting thing about high church and low church, and when you belong to a religion that's not perhaps hasn't quite preserved. They preserved the text of Christianity, the book, but they didn't preserve, you might say, the rituals, the ordinances. That's what you have in Catholicism and Orthodoxy. They have Mass in Catholicism. In Eastern Orthodox Church, they have something called the Divine Liturgy. And in their form of worship is you go and unlike a Bethel church setting or an evangelical church setting where you have someone, you would sing songs and you would raise your hands or do a form of worship that is you're trying to orient yourself by feeling quite a bit to the songs, and then you would hear a pastor deliver a sermon. Orthodoxy is way different. They don't have sermons. They have a short one at the very end, but like an hour and a half, man, you're on your feet and you are praying and you are singing the liturgy, which you are singing in response to what the priest is saying, and you're singing and praying as he blesses the emblems of the Eucharist in the Holy of Holies, or I think it's called the nave. I think that's what it's called. So their form of worship is they are trying to conform themselves in embodiment in an embodied fashion to the structure of the cosmos, which is the sacrament. Sorry, the divine liturgy. I'm not Orthodox. I get my words mixed up. It's that whole procession of rituals that leads up to the serving of the flesh and blood of Christ, the bread and wine. That is what it means to worship, is to conform yourself to that pattern. Versus the more Protestant or the more evangelical idea of worship, which is more about the dispensing of propositions. So you go there and the focal of your service for a Protestant sect is more about the words that the person speaks. And it's the delivering of propositions in the form of a sermon. Versus the Orthodox, it's the embodying of a pattern. There's differences there. And so what happens is this is called a liturgical form of worship, or sacramental theology. I think that's what it's called, where your idea of worship is not about the words you discuss one with another, but it's about the pattern that you conform yourself to. And so what happens from my opinion, in a lot of low churches, the people that don't, the sects that don't have the ordinances or the more the ritual way of knowing, they don't have the formalities of types of praying. They have lost that non-propositional way of knowing through liturgy. And so what has a high premium in their tradition becomes the written word of God, what the text on a piece of paper. And what are the text on a piece of paper or in a book? Those are ideas and propositions. And so what gains a high premium in their religion and what becomes sacred in that religion are ideas, are propositional ways of knowing. And so you'll get more philosophy, and that's you'll get a lot of philosophy spinning off of that, where the idea of being a good Christian often gets distilled down, how you participate in your Christianity means coming to Bible study and discussing Christian ideas. And so what forms from that is a certain dogmatic way of thinking quite often. And that still happens in the Orthodox Church. As opposed to the Orthodox Church, their epistemology, how they come to know something, their epistemological method of knowing the truth is not through the exchange and transmission of ideas, but in the ritual participation in the life of the church. And so there's a difference there. And so what has a high premium, what becomes of pinnacle importance, are the rituals, is the actions, is the way. And philosophy and the sharing of ideas is kind of tangential to that. So what I've discovered, because I've explored a lot of churches, is that Eastern Orthodox people, man, they like to talk ideas, and they don't get as offended about heretical ideas, because it's okay to have heretical ideas.
Oh,
Because what's important is the ritual enactment. What's important is participating in the ordinances, and then their life to those ordinances. That's what's important. So there's more liberal. I've noticed that they are more prone to talk deep theology, as opposed to evangelicals, where it's all words, and so they get very
right.
uncomfortable when I start talking about theosis and becoming like God and the depths of Hades. Oh, they get scared. So I'm not sure if that answers your question about the circles that you run into, but that's what I've noticed in my circles, because I run in a lot of circles as well. So
Yeah, that is really, really enlightening. Super interesting. Makes complete sense. Oh, I'm really,
yeah, I
really
have a
glad I
book
know
for
that
you
now.
on that. That suppresses that paradigm. It's written by an Orthodox guy. It's called Journey to Reality by Zachary Porchu. So he kind of breaks down that dichotomy pretty well between what I just shared.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I just, so I have a thought when you say that,
Mhm.
which is, you could say that this would be the counter to that, that the participatory part of something is oftentimes a lower or a more naive stage in development. So like a child who's learning something.
Well, I'll push back on that. It might be it's maybe naive, but it's more foundational, perhaps.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking like, so a child, they watch their parent um doing activity, driving a, or maybe chopping a log. And at first they copy them exactly, but then they understand what it is, why they do what they do. They understand why exactly they pull the handbrake when they do, to maybe do a drift. What parents are drifting. Just trying to
Mhm.
think of an example where there is something where like at first you copy it exactly, but then you learn the system in it. So that's what I feel like probably people would say to that. So that's my feeling actually very much of what the perception is of people from mm, more Bethel circles. Is it Pentecostal?
Mhm.
When they see Catholicism and Orthodoxy, they're like, well, why are you acting out things still? Like this should. But what you're saying is really, really interesting. That like, well, when you act out something, then you have the freedom to about it in a certain way. To
To wrestle with ideas because you have that foundation in acting versus they have their foundation in the ideas themselves. Very, very
Mhm.
interesting.
Yeah. And I like how you bring up the child thing. That's how children develop. They don't develop semantic understanding of the world. They have a foundation of, you might say, a million micro rituals between their parents, between themselves and their parents, and that becomes the foundation. And it's purely relational because it's about how you relate to the family life, and then that later the semantics form from that. Ooh, can I read you a quote from another book about this?
yeah,
I think it'll land the Christian stuff. This is a book by Father Andrew Damick. I actually met him. He runs the Lord of Spirits podcast. It's an Orthodox podcast, and talk about how deep they go in theology and mythology and all of the ancient stories, and they're comfortable with it. I love it, man. But he said this about the relationship between rituals and the sacraments. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, hold on. Oh yeah. Okay, this is called Myth and Mythology. I'll read this. So we haven't talked about the word myth in our discussion. So he introduces this. I've used the word myth, mythic, and mythology many times in this book, but now it's time to define them a little more precisely as we consider a more theoretical approach to paganism. In its basic sense, myth, from the Greek word mythos, means story. And in our discussion, I've said how the gospel is also story, meaning good spell in Old English, good story. So myth means story. I've used the word mythic a number of times in this book to refer to this sense of story, but of course I am talking about the kinds of stories that are usually called myths. stories involving interaction between the seen and unseen world. In popular usage, we tend to use myth to mean a story that is not true, but that is not its original sense. And certainly the ancient people, for whom myths were part of their religion, did not think of them that way. Myth does not get used in that way in the technical sense of the study of history and religion. The academic discipline of ritual theory makes a useful distinction between myth and mythology. A myth is a story people participate in through rituals that not only make the story part of their lives and shape their imaginations, but they are also the means through which participants enter into the story themselves. The ancient Greek myth of Persephone's abduction by Hades, for instance, was not only a story that Greek pagans told, but one in which they participated by engaging in a ritual search for the abducted goddess, seeking her out and not finding her, joining them themselves to the search of her goddess mother Demetre in the process. Christians also, of course, participate in the myths of Christianity through many kinds of rituals, most memorable in Holy Week, when we participate in the stories of the life of Christ, and Pascha, participating in both Christ's resurrection and the Passover and Exodus from Egypt. Myth, then, contrasts with mythology, which are the stories left over when the ritual participation has fallen into disuse. There is a connection here with the popular use of myth as an untrue story, but it may not be obvious at first. We tend to think that people stop participating in religious rituals because they don't believe in the related stories anymore. But in my pastoral ministry and experience, I have often observed that the opposite is usually true. More often, belief falls away after participation falls away, showing that conviction flows from conditioning. It is the ritual participation in the story that plants it firmly within the human person. Why do most people regard the ancient pagan myths as fanciful, untrue stories? Not because they have made a careful investigation into the stories as truth claims, but rather because they no longer have the experience of being joined to the story through ritual. I will not go into it here, but given this reality, it is interesting at least to raise the question of what happened to Christians when Christianity is de-ritualized, when people stop ritually participating in the stories of Christianity. Does the Christian myths turn into a mere mythology for them? Or what if the rituals change and the participation is in another kind of story? Oh.
Okay, now what I'm thinking about this is that the reason why people will rationalize not doing myths is quite reasonable, because not acting out myths is because when you're acting something out, that thing only has a possibility of death at the level of maybe people or society dying. So Jordan Peterson talks about myths battling it out, but I think lots of times those battles actually happened because the tribes that had good myths survived, and the ones that didn't act out the good myths did not survive. So when it comes to acting something out, how can you possibly have a death rebirth cycle in that? Because if you're acting out a tradition, if the action comes first, then what's to mediate that and update it to time and allow it to die off its of actions?
So are you referring to perhaps rituals losing their rituals themselves losing or becoming ossified? Are you still there?
Yeah. It cut out for a second, but I see you now.
Oh, so so are you suggesting what mediates between good myths that are ritually participated in and bad myths that are
Well, okay, maybe I'm
Mhm.
inferring here, because when I hear this talked about, I think this is an
Mhm.
argument C.S. Lewis made about why people stop their faith. Something like, well, they stop being Christians because they stop doing
it. It's not because of a belief or an understanding, but this idea of action as primary to thought,
Mhm.
as like I described, it doesn't allow for a cycle. So it sounds like this quote, what it's saying, and I'm pushing back to, is that it's saying that there's maybe a necessity to act out things because, or maybe I'm reading into that.
No, I think there's a necessity to act things out to understand. And what Nietzsche is really good on this. He's always saying that every philosopher or every spirit, every drive philosophizes in its own spirit, and he's kind of making the point that people have philosophy, but really they're all just confessions of their own way of life, as he's dissing the English for being old toads and Kant for spinning his webs of dogma. I think that the rituals, because I'm a Christian, and I think that I don't think that all Christian rituals. I do think, as Damick implies at the end, that the rituals can be changed, and then you might be participating in a different story. And that would lead to a corruption or an apostasy within a given religious sect, where they have changed the ordinances in the center of their civilization. They've changed the way they do things, and that has downstream effects, culture and politics downstream from the religious center of that civilization. But is there a mediating process between different rituals? And I think the gospel of Jesus Christ has within it, baked in it, the death and rebirth cycle. Now, I also think I don't think that the religious rituals that you see in a given church, even if they're really closely allied to the truth, they're meant as enactment to teach you something greater. And so they are not to serve as a replacement for you to know within your own heart, for you to connect your own psyche, your own soul, to expand your own agentic consciousness. They're not a replacement for that, but they are a foundation for that. I believe where the rubber meets the road when it comes to religious participation is going to be baked into how you ritually participate. When I say ritual, I mean relationally, like day to day, with your spouse, with your family, with the people in your life. That is going to be where the rubber meets the road, and that's where the gospel is truly lived. And so you can take the fractal elements of baptism and the Eucharist and the sacrament, and is it emanating day to day in your life? Okay. What I'm trying to say is, I think the rituals, the ordinances of the God. When I say ordinances, I mean rituals. The rituals and ordinances of the gospel of Jesus Christ have within it that cycle of death and rebirth that allows you to die to your old traditions and to become anew. And so the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is independent of whatever imitations whatever given religion wants to make of it, the gospel of Jesus Christ is the structure of reality. Someone has a visionary experience. They're like John the Beloved or John the Revelator, and they see the heavens open up unto them, and they're like, how am I going to communicate this way, this process, in a way that is relevant to the people? I can write it down in a book, but that's only going to go so far, so I'm going to craft a liturgy so that people can know the way through this ritual practice. But even that in itself, what they are recreating on earth, is not the structure of reality itself. This thing up here that the Catholics have, the Orthodox folks have, Mormons have, any religion that has liturgy, ritual aspects, those can fall to the wayside because those ordinances can come out of alignment with the structure of reality. But I still think there's enough remnants of truth, participatory truth, in various religious rituals that if you conformed yourself to it and you had an open mind, you would eventually get to the structure, the bottom of reality. You would know that process, and in that process itself is the mediating death and rebirth motif, is that spirit of the logos that can help you discern when it's time to, when this religious ritual has become an abomination and they're offering sacrifices to the wrong gods. Prophets get to the bottom of this, and then they go back and they say, oh, geez, Jerusalem, you're killing the prophets. You have gone away. You're making false sacrifices to false gods, because they got to the actual structure itself. So that is my answer to that.
Yeah,
Thanks
yeah.
for putting me on the spot. You're challenging my religious beliefs really hard. So
because I think they're very interesting, because I've never ever
Yeah.
actually heard a solid, like, this is a very solid argument for
Mhm.
actual ritualistic beliefs where you act things out. I've never heard such a solid argument like that. That's really, really, so I'm
Yeah.
very interested in it. That's why I'm challenging it, because I'm, just presenting my first the first things that pop into my mind is like, well, how's this thing valid? So do you suppose then that like people should be acting out sort of orthodox religious type things, and like what are those? I don't even know, because I know like
I
a
think
bit in like Catholicism, like there's like certain things you do, prayers at certain times and stuff, and
we've been entrenched in a secular rituals. We've lost our holidays to things like the Super Bowl and things to these secular holidays, and that's happening on the broad scale. The different institutions have taken the prominence that religion used to take, and that's good and bad. However, I think I believe, and I think Jonathan Bejo sees this as well, given the way that culture is with AI, with consumerism. We're entering into, if we're not already in it, this epidemic of loneliness, the meaning crisis that John Vervaeke talks about, and people are going to realize that they need deeper rituals, not these superficial rituals of flopping on the couch and watching or doom scrolling through your smartphone. An example of communal rituals, like when I was a kid, we didn't have streaming services yet. We had the Blockbuster video store. And so when I wanted to watch a movie, or my family wanted to watch a movie, my dad would take me down the street and we go to the Blockbuster movie store. And there's this whole sacrificial act of getting in the car and going to the Blockbuster movie store because we want to watch a movie. And it was right next to the GameStop, or the GameStop store where they have video games. So I would sneak in there and play video games when my dad would pick a movie. And then that store was right next to Papa John's, so we had to get a pizza for a movie night. And then we would gather all our resources and take it back to the house. Very ritualistic, by the way. We gather things and we bring them back to the sacred place, the center place. And then we all would watch a movie all together as a family, because we only had the rental for a day or two. So you had to watch the movie if you wanted to see it, because that's the only time you get to watch a movie if it came from Blockbuster. And it was a communal experience. But nowadays, that's been made obsolete, because you can just stream things from the loneliness of your own bedroom, and the family is not forced to have movie nights anymore. It's kind of sad. You don't get that whole Papa John's experience and everything that goes into it. People just watch it when it's convenient in their own bedrooms. Same thing with things like the supermarket or the farmer's market. That's not religious, but there was this act of coming together to a single place to get the goods that the community has produced. And you would meet people and you would interact. Now Amazon delivery and now Walmart deliveries just give you your food. And it's making things a lot more efficient, but what's lying in the wake of this is this lack of common community, common union. That's what the sacrament or the Eucharist is called communion, meaning common union. And that was a ritual thing that brought us together. And so I think, given the way that culture is going, more ritual participation is, people are going to be searching for it. Now, are they going to find it in good structures that are not so corrupt? Hope so. But in such a vacuum, other things can give one meaning, other false rituals. like Germany in before World War II. They were completely humiliated after World War I. They had a meaning crisis. People were isolated. Hannah Arnett talks about this. Same with the Russians. People were socially isolated, and a new ideology with its own attendant flashy rituals come along, and they get swept up into this new ideology and this new religion of Hitler and Marxism, Stalinism, or Leninism. So yeah, I think it is I think it is incumbent upon us to have discernment in that and figure out how to navigate that. But I think that's going to be one of the challenges of our generation.
Okay, now I wonder
Yeah.
wonder how long you want to go, because I think that we have a different enough model that I am personally very, very engaged in this, because it's very different, very novel to me, and also very, very academically profound, very, very rooted. So I wonder, I wonder how long you want to go, but so I have an entirely different perspective of this. So when you talk about like the lack of meaning, where people are turning to their devices, the rituals have disappeared. The rituals that bring us together have largely disappeared. I want to go to the source of the problem, and I want to find what is actually meaningful, because you can be a Christian and you can act out your life, but then you can also be like, well, what am I doing? And even if you think about, let's say, a state where we solve the problems of the world, because I think traditionally Christians would like go and help. They would sort of do something meaningful because they're helping society, which is of course meaningful. Another thing that is intrinsically meaningful is to have children. Intrinsically meaningful. You're giving something. You're going into the future, really. My feeling is that, so when it comes to rituals, I think that generally what the purpose of them, understood from a psychological perspective, is you act them out until you've sort of understood the way of thinking, because you have to act it out in order to understand something often. But then you get to a point where you don't continue to act it out. And so it sounds like when you're describing like certain rituals, it's like, well, I'm not interested in a ritual unless I know what is the meaning behind it, because you can act out these rituals like you're saying, sitting around the table and eating, what we say, well, this brings us together, but that there's also a symbol of the snake eating its tail, the aurora borealis, this thing where you do the thing for the sake of doing the thing. So an example of this is like, let's say you get around and you talk to people because you want to, let's say you're a student and you want to learn better, and you know that if you talk about it, you learn better. So you go, okay, I'm just going to talk to a student about this so I learn more. But I think that's an aurora borealis, because the reason, the star that you see that you're following is learning, and so you're doing something for the sake of learning. And what are you doing? It's like there's no direction in itself. It's like, well, why are you doing the thing? Well, because I want to learn. It's like, okay, but then what do you talk about in a conversation? So you have this, you go, okay, we're gonna talk, and we're just gonna do it for the sake of learning. It's like, well, then where do we go? Like, you just what? You just like, there's no direction in it. So when you talk about your rituals and stuff, I go, okay, well, what is the underlying meaning that we're deriving these rituals from? How do they actually have meaning in and of themselves?
Well, I think in the case of the Christian ritual, all the sacraments and what they all point to is, this is what Peterson is getting at quite heavily in Maps of Meaning, especially the last two lectures. Regeneration, rebirth, but it's not about your expansive learning, your expansion of consciousness, your deeper understanding. Christ dies, is reborn, so he can lift the whole up, so that all can ascend. Buddha comes down so that other people can also go on that upward path through of progression. John the Beloved is more blessed because he also does the same thing when all the other apostles want to hang out and kick it in heaven for a bit. He wants to continue the same pattern of Christ, which is to condescend, to descend, come back down to lift the rest up. And what does it mean to descend? It involves suffering, it involves death, it involves, the best way you can notice is to become a father, because when you become a dad, you are literally sacrificing your life for this child. Our marriage and family kids will strip you of your resources, man. And but you're doing it so that they can also progress, so that they can have, immortality and eternal life is the glory of God. It's to bring about that for other people. That is also baked into the pattern itself, and so it's continuing. Well, it's almost like the theory of evolution: continuing growth, continuing expansion. Same thing in the Christian ritual. When I believe when it's truly practiced, that's what it brings about, is life abundance for all, and the continuation of not just your agency, but the agency of others. So that's how it's practical. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So no, I understand. I understand that it's practical in that sense, but so Peterson brought an understanding to society. He integrated lots of the Christian ideas, especially the sacrifice motif. The sacrifice motif is a process of moving forward, but you still have to ask, well, where are you moving forward to? Because the way that you're describing things is distinctly how to do it, not necessarily what to do. So the death, the rebirth is a cycle that keeps you correctly orientated. It's a very, very deep, very, very deep, thing. But like pragmatically, you go, okay, so all these rituals of like getting together and doing things are replaced, and they no longer exist. But then like pragmatically, like what do you actually do? Because if the function of these rituals is to keep you in that place of the death and rebirth cycle, that's good. But then like that is a way to operate with the world. It's not an operation itself. Like death and rebirth is not itself an operation. It's it's part of a movement towards something. To correctly move towards something, you have to be a part of the cycle, but it's not yeah.
It's a process, it's not a product. Is that what you're implying a little bit, or?
Yeah, it's a it's a process. It's not a goal.
Yeah, I think the fruit, the gospel of Jesus Christ is a process. It's a story. It's an eternal story, as Peterson says, and maps of meaning. But the product is on you. The fruit is on you. How are you going to take that gospel process, that pattern? And you can have all these tools of rituals to help you out, and you have the Word of God to think through it, and you have your rational capacity to think through it. How are you going to reconcile, live that, incarnate it into your own life? And I think that's that's the metaphysical claim of Christianity. That's what it means to be a Christian. Like, you have to figure, that's on you to figure that out. God has given us a process, a spirit, a myth. You are the product of that. If you live it, you will obtain that product. So
okay,
and there'll be fruit in the vineyard. Yep.
Now, very, very straightforward example would be like, so on Peterson Academy, this is my perspective. I'll just give my perspective, and you can see how it fits in. But I'm giving my perspective because I don't see where ritual fits into this. So we see on Peterson Academy, there is actually something that we can move towards. There's a direction we can go, and that direction could be something as large but easily accessible as, well, we are creating a system, a platform where information is accessible, distributed, built, where we're doing this system. And that's like a really good direction. And where in that system, ritual doesn't really come into it because it's like always updating. Now it does come into it to some extent, and now maybe I've just realized how I argued against myself here because in this extent, you do rituals. You go, okay, well now we're going to do debates every now and then. We're going to do these different ritual things, and we'll do these, rituals really. And then what you're saying is, well, this is the great meta ritual that's happening in Christianity. Is like, well, we're going to do this thing in life where we create rituals for ourselves here. Yeah. So I don't know. I didn't really pose the threat.
No,
there
I love
because...
I love how you argued against yourself. That was because people will complain there's not enough structure in Peterson Academy. But then if you take the philosophy of education class and maybe even the capitalism class in the future, Hicks makes an argument that the jobs in the future, education prepares people for the future world. And the future world, most organizations are going to be really close to their entrepreneurial roots because AI and robotics are going to change the world. And so at the end of his course, he makes the argument that the skills that will be necessary are critical thinking and rational and critical thinking and creativity, so that you can navigate, you can be entrepreneurial in a very topsy-turvy, very open, wild west world, because there's not going to be that for us. And so part of the ritual of Christ, is it gives you stability in the chaos of in the waters of Sheol, in the waters of chaos. And part of the good education that Peterson Academy is giving us, and like you say, it might be baked into the ritual, is the demand is placed on the students to, what are you going to do with this education? I think that's what we're trying to do right now. So, because I don't think Peterson Academy wants to rob that entrepreneurial spark, because that's going to be such primacy in the future. So,
yeah.
Oh, we should probably wrap up soon because it's getting near my bedtime, but I'm enjoying this discussion.
Yeah, me too. And I feel like this is actually a good place to wrap up because I feel like just in my process of this conversation, I've gotten to a point where now I don't have any more objections to your model, and I have to sit with it, maybe think about integrating it or posing further objections. And yeah, it was a really, really, really interesting discussion for me. I learned a lot.
Yeah. I had no idea what we're going to talk about today, but I enjoyed it. So thank you, Joshua. I should probably finish my report on DiaLogos real quick.
All right.
Integrate it into John Vervaeke's model, into my group of friends, and we all come from the same religious background, because I saw that in Vervaeke he had something in DiaLogos that my community, the people in my walk of life, was lacking religiously. And so we integrated it. We all decided to intentionally take a different translation of the Sermon on the Mount, and we used the Sermon on the Mount as our base text. I took a Hebrew version, memorized it. My friend Chris, he took a very evangelical. He's the one that's in the Bethel Church as well. He took some translation of that. My other friend took the Viking translation, the Iliad, and we literally decided to integrate a completely different perspective on the Sermon on the Mount, and then come together in DiaLogos and have a rich exchange. It took us 9 months to get through the whole Sermon on the Mount.
Wow.
Just off of that. And the DiaLogos has continued to grow in that space. And, well, you like what we've been doing tonight, there's a rich DiaLogos where we're changing our perspective, and the purpose of DiaLogos is that the Logos, that spirit of transformation, the spirit of regrowth, or death and rebirth, will emerge in the dia perspective, multiple perspectives, or when two or more are gathered in Christ's name, he will be there. And so, like tonight, my perspective, there was a logos, there was a thread in our dialogue that emerged, and that we were pulling on, we were grabbing onto, and it was taking us on an adventure. That has been what we've been doing in our DiaLogos practice as in our Covenant Christianity group. And so I was thinking in the future, perhaps one day, that might be a useful medium of dialogue for Peterson Academy students. We don't have to talk about religion, but we can use it to talk about philosophy, psychology, biology, I see it as a model that works, that has a lot of promise to it. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything you're saying,
Mhm.
it's shimmering and sparkling with potential and deep importance. It's really profound.
Yeah. All right. Well, Joshua, I'm excited to have more discussions with you and doing this some more. So thank you.
Me too. Yeah, thank you as
Yeah.
well.
It's been an absolute pleasure. So
Likewise. All right. Take care.
take care.